Okay, in this lecture we're going to be talking about pivot tables. Pivot tables are an amazing tool for doing really powerful calculations. You can do a lot of different quick calculations with the same data set or the same table, and they're also really great if you have a lot of data that's changing frequently and you need to continually run reports on that changing data. And for some reason, pivot tables and pivot charts seem to be very intimidating to a lot of people, and I can understand why, because there are a number of moving parts and there are a couple of things that you have to do right to get them to work well. We're going to cover all of that in this section so that by the end of the next few lectures you will be able to create a pivot table from scratch or from Excel's recommended pivot tables feature so you can do powerful calculations on your data. So the first thing we have to look at when we're thinking about creating a pivot chart is the data itself. What we're looking at here is just some sample data for a fictitious home store, and you can see that we have headings across the top here with sales rep, region, item sold, the price of the item sold, the category that the item is sold in within the store, and the day that it was sold. And this data is basically for 1 week worth of sales. So we have our sales rep names, which you recognize probably from our previous spreadsheets. We have the region, west or east, because there are two separate stores, so each sales rep is designated to one store, either the west store or the east store. Then we have the items. We have the prices of each item. We have the categories, so we have like living room, patio, etc. And then of course the days of the week. So first let's talk about a couple of rules, kind of basic guidelines to set yourself up for success when creating a pivot table. But before we get into the rules, let me just show you an example of a very simple pivot table so you can kind of have a vision of what we're going to be doing. So based on this table, let's say that we wanted to find out which sales rep sold the most in this week. A simple way to do that with a pivot chart would look like this. So what it does is it pulls out our rows, which in this case happens to be our sales reps' names, and then it takes a sum of the price of all of the items that they sold, and it sums them up next to their name. You can see that these are sorted from highest to smallest, and the way we do that is we just click anywhere in the field, right click, and click sort, smallest to largest, or largest to smallest. We'll go with largest to smallest, and we can quickly and easily see that Jane is number 1 for sales, and that Bob and Robert are battling it out for second place. So that's what a pivot table looks like. Now let's go back to our rules for setting up our data so that when we create this table, everything works smoothly like this. So the first rule is that you always want to use a table for your data and not a simple range. For a couple of our charts and things in the past, we've just selected ranges for our source data, but tables are more dynamic and you can add and change data within your table and it will update into your pivot tables and your pivot charts much better. So if we click on any cell in here, we're going to see up above the ribbon that it says Table Tools Design. When it says Table Tools like that, that tells us that we already have a table. Sometimes these drop-down arrows are a helpful indicator, but there are other types of formatting in Excel that shows these drop-downs, so it's not a sure indicator. And when we click on the Design tab, we can see that this has been named Sales Reps. And just so I can back up for a second and show you how to do that, I'm going to convert this back to a range. It's going to ask me if I want to convert it, and I'm going to say yes. And so now when I click on any cell in here, you'll notice that it's not bringing up this additional tab that has Table Tools and Design. That's how I know that this is now a range. So now I'm going to keep my cell within my range selected, and I'm going to go to Insert and Table, and you can see it's asking where's the data for your table. It's already selected it, and we can see it's selected my data all the way down. Leave this checked because my table does have headers, which are these category lists across the top, and then we'll click OK. It has now formatted it as a table, and I'm going to go in here and I'm going to go to Table Styles, and I'm just going to click on None. And the reason for that is I can convert this back to a range at any time, and the formatting won't cause me any problems. Down the road, once I'm sure that I'm going to keep this as a table, I can go ahead and format it however I want to make it look good or be more presentable. But in the meantime, it's easiest and it avoids potential issues by keeping the formatting as none. So that's rule number 1, format it as a table. And we now have it formatted as a table, but since I changed it to a range and changed it back, now I have to name it again. And you aren't able to put spaces in these, so it's all continuous characters. Then press enter, and be sure to make your table name descriptive, because if you have a number of tables and you call them all data or table 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, then it's going to be really hard to go back in and find them and refer to them in other tables and charts and things. So do yourself the favor of making it descriptive to save yourself trouble down the road. Rule number 2, which technically you would want to address before you create a table, is that you want all of your data to be organized into columns with headings. And we've already looked at this before. We have our headings, which is perfect. And then all of the data in the columns specifically relates to that column heading. And that's very important. For instance, our categories are listed in a column. So every sale that's in the living room category or the patio category or the kitchen category is all listed vertically in the column. And the wrong way to do this would be to do it like this. If I had column headings of bathroom, kitchen, living room, and patio across the top here, and these are my headings, then these are not going to sort correctly in my pivot table, and essentially it defeats the purpose of creating a pivot table. So this is wrong. Having them listed under category is right. So that's rule number 2. Rule number 3 is that you don't have any empty columns or rows. So let me show you why this is important. If I have an extra row here, an extra blank row, and I select on this cell and I go to insert my pivot table, Excel is going to read all of this connected data around this cell and assume that the table ends here, because it's really smart about picking up on divisions of rows like this. So we want to help Excel out and keep it from getting confused by keeping those extra blank rows out of there. And the same applies to columns. If I have an extra column here that's cutting the day column off from the rest of the table, there's a good chance that Excel is not going to recognize that this is part of the table. So that's rule number 3. Make sure there are no empty columns or rows in your table. And then rule number 4 is that your data should be consistent in all of your columns. In other words, I wouldn't want this to say Monday, Saturday, Saturday, and then have a date, like March 3rd, and then go back to Sunday and Tuesday. These are all days of the week so that they can all be sorted using a text value, and they're consistent. Same with the price. Of course, we wouldn't want to have 300, 300, and then a word like sold or free or something like that to confuse Excel, and so on and so forth. So good consistent formatting down all of your columns will make your data really work well when you go to create your table. And finally, if you're going to format a value, for instance, I want to change the number formatting here, don't just format one cell. You want to format the whole column here. So if I want to format this cell to change it to a different type of number formatting, I want to format this entire column or field together. So I can select the whole column by clicking Control-Shift down arrow, and Excel will search all the way to the bottom of my field. And then I can go into my formatting and change this to whatever I want. If I want to say currency, I want to take off the decimal places to clean it up, then I can do that. That will also prevent you from confusing Excel, especially if you start adding data into this. For instance, if I add a section here and I want to say that something is $200 and I hit enter, you notice that it formats it the same as the entire field. So that's rule number 5, formatting the entire field rather than just one cell. So now that we have our data all cleaned up, we can click in any cell within our table and we can go to Insert and we can create a pivot table. And I'll show you a quick one just so you can see how it's going to look. And then in the next lectures, we're going to get into detail about these. So here we are in our recommended pivot tables, and Excel is just going to analyze our data or our table and tell us some relevant pivot tables that would work using that data. So I'm just going to pick a really simple one here. So this is a sum of price by category, and it has the rows are bath, kitchen, living room, luggage, and patio. So it's essentially taking our categories and then it's summing up the price from each of those categories. So really simple. I'm going to click OK, and it's just opened up a new worksheet and it's dropped my pivot table right in there. And I would want to go in and sort this from largest to smallest. And now with just a couple of clicks, we're able to take that whole list of data and we can see that sales in the living room category are $2,560 and sales from the patio category are $1,250, and that the bath department has only sold $290. So we're able to really quickly analyze some of this information to make decisions about this particular store. So that's how you get your data organized, cleaned up, and set up correctly so that you can create a pivot table. And in the next couple of lectures, we're going to look into a lot more detail of how to create and use pivot tables to really sort your information and how to make pivot charts out of those.